Give me a second. Let me see. Oh, hey, I'm live. Excellent. So, Miami day two. I thought Miami would be. First of all, you guys can hear me okay? Any quick comment? Lights, camera, action. Testing one, two, three. Quick comment, you can say you can hear me? Yes, good. Let's jump right in. Day two, typically the last day of a conference is always the weakest day. Nothing really good happens, but this is the exception. So we have a lot of good stuff to cover, and I was really impressed with the speakers today. So let me walk you through everything that I learned and everything I think is worthwhile sharing with you all. So, Bitcoin Miami, day two, math, money, freedom. No disclaimer because I'm just talking about the words other people say. So, let me see. Let's start with one of my favorites, Mike Novogratz, and he's going to start twice today because he wears a different jacket every time he goes on stage. So, Mike Novogratz basically jumped in and said, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, they are all coming and they're all coming in fast. And basically, the narrative as a store of value was accelerated by C-19 pandemic. And despite everybody thinking, oh, the world is ending and Bitcoin isn't doing very well, he made it very clear we are still up. I think it was 33% on the year so far. So things are going incredibly well, and people are still very pessimistic. But he wanted to just reassure everybody, we're still early. Now, he spoke as well about Bitcoin being an 80 vol asset. I refer to it as VIX. Vol is volatility. So it is still very volatile at 80%, but he said mainline it. And he said the S&P 500 is about 15% volatile, gold is 8%, etc. So net, start with 2 to 3% in your portfolio, and that's what the big guys are doing. What he also was really impressed by is the amount of human capital going into this industry and the open-mindedness that's actually occurred as well over the past year or so has blown him away. And probably the biggest and most impressive takeaway point from him is the fact that he believes it will be a global reserve asset in 24 months, which I thought was staggering. So he, in other notes that I remember him saying, he said, a sovereign will buy Bitcoin in the next 12 to 24 months. He spoke about the pound sterling devaluing 98% over the last 70 years. So for all the English out there, sorry about that, but the same thing has happened with the US dollar. He said as well, we're still early. 150 million people approximately, I don't think it's quite that high, have Bitcoin. But that being said, if it is 150 million, that is the most distributed asset in history. And never before in the history of the world has a brand been built this fast too, with this much distribution. So nothing but goodness from Mike. So big thank you, Mike, for all of your great words today. Let's go a little bit deeper. He was on stage with another Mike. I call them the two Mikes, Mike Belshe. And Mike Belshe came out with a couple of words. First of all, Bitcoin is clearly the best store of value, and that gets people excited. That makes it global. But he did pause there and said, for payments, it's still too volatile right now. But it is an opportunity to change the way the financial service system works, and it will get bigger. And as it gets bigger, it gets safer. And as it gets bigger, the volatility also goes down, which again, nothing but goodness. And Mike has been in the game for a long time. And then on the closing thoughts from the two Mikes, the Mike and Mike, the moderator asked them, what do they believe about, does Bitcoin have headwinds or tailwinds? And they both said nothing but tailwinds. And this will help us also evolve to a clean energy, not just for Bitcoin mining, but for the whole planet. And finally, to reiterate, the institutions are coming, and they're coming hard and fast. So that was the two Mikes to kick off the day. Then we had Preston Pysh. Now, we had so many good speakers today, I was just blown away, just to reiterate that. Now, it's funny because he said something that I've been saying for a long time. Everybody thinks proof of work, proof of stake, etc. Which one is better, which one is worse? And he said proof of stake is more of the same. And what he means by that, without giving it away, that's closer you are to the money, and the more money you have, the more control you have, which is what they call the Cantillon effect. So I thought that was an interesting thought from Preston. I have a lot of respect for the guy. I mean, it was all rock stars today. He also said something that I loved. He said, everything on the planet is mispriced. And he likes the idea of a stable coin paying 10% and the US dollar paying nothing. And he said as well, quantitative easing, that's QE, and bidding bonds to the moon is bid into asset prices. So basically, his whole theory, which is kind of interesting, he spoke about all the money printing, all of the bond inflation is going to bring the world to what is called UBI, which is universal basic income, which means just giving everybody money to stay at home and nobody will be motivated to work. So he painted a pretty dark picture of the world out there. So beware of that as well. So thank you, Preston. Great stuff. Jeff Booth was also on stage with Preston, and he pulled out a very interesting stat that I liked. Basically, to produce 46 trillion of value, it cost $180 trillion of money to print it, which I thought that was stunning. He also pointed out to how a few years ago he used to spend $19.99 on a CD, and now he can spend $9.99 a month for unlimited music. But he says this whole efficiency should be moving broad-based to all populations, bringing about a fairer world. He also talked about technology and has made inflation negative. And Kathy Wood talks a lot about that, the deflationary impact of technology, basically machines and robots making everything, deflationary. However, there is an awful lot of inflation that goes along with that too. But his whole point was things like music and technology are definitely very deflationary. Now, he said if rates go up, everything will burn to the ground. Therefore, QE, which is quantitative easing, will last forever. It's too late now. And there's some cool stats coming up as well that I pulled for you all. And he said, we are living in a world where we are corrupting money. And the future is artificial intelligence and centralized control. And that is the complete opposite to what Bitcoin is. And that was the cool message from Jeff today. I just loved how he pieced it all together, painted all his pictures and brought it all, home. Okay, Mark Yusko, another guy you all know, he said, keep calm, we'll print more. He kind of piggybacked on what the other fellows are saying. And there was the plan since 1913 to steal all the wealth from the middle class and the lower class and to hand it to the top people in the food chain through inflation. Those that can afford the most pristine assets and those that are closest to the money printers control everything else. Everybody else gets punished by inflation. So I thought it was very short and very sweet, but also very poignant. So you can see we're going to be talking a lot about inflation and money and how Bitcoin solves all those problems. This guy I thought was very, very interesting. He was probably my favorite speaker today, Greg Foss. I never heard of Greg Foss until today. I knew everybody else, but not this fellow. And he spoke about the debt spiral, not death spiral. And he said, all you need is 11th grade math to understand exactly what's going on. And he placed it in such simple terms. He spoke, debt is now 4 times global GDP at a 3% interest rate. So if you take 4 times 3%, you get 12%. That is the amount the global economy needs to grow. Okay, I'm going to repeat that again because I thought it was so simple the way he put it. So global debt is 4 times the size of global GDP, the amount produced by the world, and it is at an interest rate of 3%, which means if the economies around the world don't increase growth by 12% per year, we're just shrinking. And that basically means we can never outgrow all of our debt or even pay the interest on it. So again, very scary when you think about it in those terms. Now, he said, money needs to be printed. Bitcoin is the best asymmetric opportunity in 30 years. But what blew me away more than anything, and that's why I really love this guy, he said, even if Bitcoin has a chance of going to zero, and if that chance is 95%, he's still buying because it's the best bet he's ever seen in his entire life. He also spoke about Bitcoin being digital energy, which is very similar to what Michael Saylor says. And he said Russia is selling natural energy for Ishcoin, you all know what that is, fiat, And energy in 10 years or earlier will be denominated in Bitcoin. So, as you know, Russians typically have been trading oil with dollars. They're getting away from that. And that's going to have a huge impact on the US dollar as well. And he's kind of piggybacking on some of that narrative. So, a lot to digest there, but this was probably the most important takeaway from the whole show. Now, there was a piece on mining. It was hosted by Kevin O'Leary, who was Fred Thiel, Jason Les, Frank Holmes. These are all from Riot and Marathon and all those companies. But basically, they were talking about Bitcoin mining, and they talked a little bit at the beginning about how buying Bitcoin on an ATM and new on-ramp, which is everywhere in the US and all over Europe, is a new way for people to send money. So they're not using Western Union or MoneyGram anymore to send money back to the Philippines or other places. They're just printing out a receipt at a Safeway or grocery store, and then they're texting their family in other parts what the Bitcoin is. And this has been adopted very fast through necessity. And another piece at the very end, they'll talk about in El Salvador and what they're doing as well with Bitcoin. But the adoption rate of Bitcoin and the network effect cannot be understated. And these are just points of reference we're seeing. Now, the HUD 8 CEO, who wasn't there, but said something very, very interesting. And as you know, I'm a HUD 8 fan. HUD 8C, and the stock has been clobbered, so we'll leave that aside for now. But HUD 8 CEO, we will never take a single coin off our balance sheet. Buy my stock, and I will never sell Bitcoin. But having my stock gives you Bitcoin exposure that will grow over time. So that was a crazy good endorsement. Now, the old adage is owning a printing press is better than buying the books. So the miners actually print the money, which is a good thing. And miners will hold as long as they can. But they do have expenses. And one of the other colleagues, I think it was Jason, he said, as the hash rate increases 40 to 50% a year, they need to increase the infrastructure 40 to 50% to keep up with the hash rate, i.e. more hardware, more processing, more electricity, etc. And then there was an interesting piece here about, they were talking about lobbying for the Bitcoin industry and that the Bitcoin industry has no voice. And of course, the audience being all libertarians, I said, we don't want Bitcoin to have a voice, but they believe it's good to be able to get states like New York over the hump. But that was kind of a little bit of a political thing. So anyway, the audience wants Bitcoin not to have a voice. They prefer kind of being its own thing, decentralized, completely decentralized. Okay, Robert Breedlove, he said some interesting things as well. He described Bitcoin as the most important invention in human history ever, bar none. And this guy also knows his stuff. He said that I learned something. I learned a bunch today, which I thought, I was very happy with. An asset is a relationship between the owner and the asset. And Bitcoin is a first property with full rights. So think about that for a second. You could own fiat, but you don't really have rights over it because it can be diluted and debased. And so, and I love this sentence. Every time a dollar is printed, that is a property violation on every person that owns a dollar. So basically what he's saying is here, if you got $1 million in your bank account and all of a sudden the money supply grows by 40%, you're losing a huge chunk of your $1 million of savings. And that is theft. And that's the way it was described by Robert Breedlove, which I thought was very good. The Fed is stealing our property and our time, which I thought was kind of staggering. So a lot of heavy-hitting stuff today, much more so than yesterday. Jimmy Song, one of the former Bitcoin developers, and a funny fellow, he said, property right is the most basic human rights. So you can see a lot of trends here around property and human rights and everything else. So every evil regime is when the government decides what is moral, not the people. And Bitcoin is a natural law of money, but fiat is used to control people. I thought that was interesting. He said a very strong sentence. I actually had to put in quotation marks. The current system is a cesspool of theft and cronyism. That was, I hope I don't get demonetized for saying that, but they're his words. And US dollar is a reserve currency. And every time the US dollar expands, the world is getting robbed. So it's not just the US, but all the other countries around the world that use the US dollar and have things denominated in the US dollar. Everybody's getting robbed, not just Americans. So again, heavy narrative around inflation and the theft that it is. Now, finally, and a guy called Guy Hirsch, he said, Bitcoin is a natural right to own property and defend wealth. And this was another angle I thought was very interesting. there's digital migration in two ways. One, we are moving to a digital world. And second of all, the digital money is also a new paradigm without risking saving lives. So he says it will save lives at the end of the day. And this is the moral case for Bitcoin. So basically, if people need to escape their countries, there was a case of somebody having to leave Russia. You could leave Russia with $100 only per person. You couldn't take your money out of the country. I know people who are leaving South Africa. They can't take their money out of the country. And there's a lot of capital restraints on everybody. But with Bitcoin, you can keep the code in your head and you can walk out over the border. So Lyn Alden, big fan of her, top-notch economist and analyst. She said the dollar is the only currency to buy commodities in many emerging markets. You need oil or energy or copper or whatever else, you've got to use the US dollar. And when revenue is in local currency and the debt is in a stronger currency like the US dollar, this is a huge mismatch. And this is what destroys countries. And this is part of the narrative that Mike Novogratz said, that within 12 to 24 months, a sovereign will use Bitcoin as their reserve currency. And Lyn Alden is saying this as well. And the Cantillon effect, even though I don't think she spelled it out directly, but that is being close to the money printer, has to change because it's punishing countries, it's punishing people, etc. So a lot of heavy stuff. Now this is Mike, part 2. Did promise you he is back again with a different colored jacket. I think he's getting ready for a rave tonight from what I hear. And he needed a drink on stage. So basically, we're at 150 million Bitcoin users, so about 2% of the global population. Again, I don't think it's quite that high, but 2% is good to go with. Paul Tudor Jones, a year ago, was the first hedge fund to get into Bitcoin, and that was a tipping point for many others to get in. And then he spoke about insurance companies, the most conservative of all, MassMutual, getting in on the game. And he said 45 more are coming. He knows, he talks to them. So the allocation is not only for individuals and high net worth people, but also traditional conservative companies that are moving their treasuries. And again, they're going to start with 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is happening very gradually and relatively fast. He also spoke about another thing. In the old world, you don't custody where you transact. So for example, if you buy something from Morgan Stanley, it's maybe held by somebody else or whatever the case was. He said with Bitcoin, it's the complete opposite. You do both at the same place, which I thought was funny. And he spoke about Bitcoin spreading as a virus. Probably not the type of words you want to use in this day and age, but he said, the narrative is growing, the popularity is growing, and people are getting in. Now, he also said, the other funny thing, he's said it many times before, every time he's on CNBC, I think he got it from Scaramucci, in fact. He said, if you are not long, you are short. And that's a stark message. And the other thing that I took away, I didn't write it in the notes because it's just too many words, but the bulk of wealth, at least, I don't know if he's talking about the US or globally, is held by 50 to 80-year-olds, managed by financial advisors. And he said this isn't going to change overnight. But he did say companies like Morgan Stanley have just trained about 12,000 financial advisors to sell Bitcoin. So the infrastructure, the wall of money, the tsunami of money is coming. And the big banks are now trained on how to sell Bitcoin and Bitcoin funds. So we are early. It's only just beginning. Despite the weakness in Bitcoin price today, I thought it would have had more of a bounce from the conference. It's still flat, still strong at the 35K support level. So this guy, Charles Cascarilla, he said, we are at the first out of the first inning. Now, I don't claim to know anything about baseball, but that means I think they have 9 innings. And there's many outs. So we aren't even partway through the very first inning. So we're super, super early. He spoke about $770 trillion of assets, and he asked what percentage is on the blockchain, and he said 0. In fact, the $770 trillion is part of my $1 million thesis for how Bitcoin gets to $1 million and how I broke it down and how people will start allocating towards that. And he said we started going from early adopter, which are the libertarians, to Main Street and Wall Street, and that's all happening. And the firms were afraid to be first, but ever since PayPal, now they are afraid to be last. So it's happening. And in 18 months, all humanity will have access to a digital wallet. That was a big statement. Basically, the whole world having access. And he said, nobody runs it, but everybody can join it. And that was another cool thing that I thought was nice. So fingers crossed he's right about everybody having access to Bitcoin within 18 months. That would be huge. It's Nearly at the end. Sorry, it's a long stuff, but there was so much good stuff to share with you all today. I just wanted to get it all there. Fang from OKCoin, she said, it's critical to keep Bitcoin open source because that keeps it transparent and independent. And Hong gives grants that have no strings to the developers of Bitcoin. What really took me away is from her, she didn't realize that people that invest in Bitcoin don't know that Bitcoin needs to fund developers to keep it going. And there's a lot of cool people. I think Michael Saylor gave Bitcoin developers $250,000. Hong Fang invested $100,000 on stage live in a real-time transfer to the developers. But again, people don't know that these people need funding to keep the protocol secure. So that was good to share that, good for people to be aware that these developers don't get paid by transaction fees, and these developers don't get paid by miners, which is a common misconception. So good to share that. Sam Bankman-Fried, this is crazy. He's a MIT guy, 29 years of age, billionaire, super smart. They had an interesting conversation there. And he is the CEO of FTX, who I actually really enjoy using his platform. He said, we want a financial, and I don't plug anything, but I must say I was very impressed with how they operate. We want a financial system to plug in an easier way, but each jurisdiction drives need for regional exchanges, and that's part of the challenge. That's why it's really difficult to roll out an exchange, a centralized exchange that works globally. And DEXs were discussed. He said they're a hot topic. DEXs, I didn't realize decentralized exchanges already handle, according to him, 5% of trade volume, which is huge. But he said currently there's no relationship between CEXs, centralized exchanges, and DEXs. And long term, he doesn't see there being a competition, but he warned as well, not all DEXs are perfect, and they've got a long way to go before they overtake banks. But the key word there is overtake banks. So he's already talking about that. Now, it went after that into the importance of transactions per second. Hundreds of thousands of millions of transactions per second is what exchanges need to be able to support. And he said, we're actually there now with some of these blockchain solutions that exist. There was also talk of leverage. A lot of people think leverage is bad. Leverage caused the crash from 40,000 to 60,000 to 40,000 for Bitcoin, but that's not the case. He said leverage is not bad. It depends on how you use it. But sometimes, I've been using margin leverage for a long time, not for crypto trading, because I know it's dangerous, but for equities. But you need to know exactly how to manage your risk. And if you use it correctly, that can be very high payoff. So that was kind of an interesting discussion. Finally, the very last piece. Sorry, all this was an emotional piece from Jack Mallers. And he spoke about El Salvador. And it is now the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender. But the key code is how the new legislation in El Salvador is basically saying central banks are increasingly taking action, I think, that may cause harm to economic stability of the people in El Salvador. So basically, what they're doing now is they've authorized the circulation of Bitcoin as a digital currency as something that cannot no longer be controlled by the government, which is cool. So a big thumbs up to El Salvador. I hope there's more countries like that. And finally, quick summary, fix the money, fix the world, the whole theme. Obviously, Bitcoin fixed supply. In fact, it's a reducing supply because people are losing their keys and they're losing their coins. So be very careful when you self-custody. It is a monetary policy not controlled by anybody, but enforced by a distributed network. Predictable issuance. I love that so much. Open, global, permissionless, improves remittance, especially for those people that work so hard in foreign countries to send money back to their families. They no longer have to pay 50% fees to Western Union and other places because they got to pay at both sides. And lower transaction costs and improves financial inclusivity. Everybody can be part of it and nobody can control it. So I'm going to just open up to a bit of Q&A. I hope that wasn't too long, everybody. A lot of material to get through, but today was an awesome day. I'm going to pop up the chat, answer a couple of questions, and see if I missed any key super chats. There's also a cool feature now as well that I have here. I'm going to turn myself on full, but I can blow up super chats. Watch this. I think I can put it on screen. Did that pop up? Hopefully it did. Good morning. We got people in Germany. Yeah, wearing a summary type shirt. So let me just make sure I didn't miss any key questions coming in from you all. And thank you all for being here on a Saturday. Pop out chat. Let me see. We have people from Norway. Lash, wonderful summary. Appreciate your work. Hey, Sahada Flafianos, thank you so much for your contribution. Norwegian Krona, my son's girlfriend is from Oslo. So we have an international group. And I'm sorry if I missed any super chats, but it doesn't kind of scroll back when I'm going through the presentation. I didn't miss anything. So any quick questions from you all? I don't even know how long I've been running. I think more than half an hour. It took a long time. But I just want to say, everybody, there was so much goodness in the conference today. It blew me away. I thought it would be a nothing burger, and it was incredible. So let me see if there's any cool questions here. Yeah, Captain Catchalot, the O'Leary thing between two Bitcoins, dirty and clean. Yeah, that's a narrative he's trying to push. He's still learning what the Bitcoin world is all about. I think there could be a time, there's a lot of move towards the whole ESG area I've spoken about. And there might be companies, for example, if an insurance company who's very conservative wants to put Bitcoin on the treasury, they may want to tell their shareholders and customers to be, a well-behaved ESG type firm. Hey, we've only bought clean coins from Kevin O'Leary. But to be honest, God knows what type of coins I have. They're probably all, as he calls, blood coins or coins mined in China. Who knows what? So I wouldn't let that worry people too much. Thank you also for all the likes. Let me see if I got... Oh, thank you, JR. You were too kind. And I think you've contributed before, but, you're just very, very kind. Let me see. How to use FTX in the US. You go to ftx.us. I actually have a referral link. I think you get 5 or 10% off trades, but they have the lowest fees, lowest trades, and it's so easy to set up. If you want FTX that's outside the US, you just go to ftx.com, and that's their platform. But super impressive. Shakakar, hello from Argentina, man. So sad. We are always an example of why I buy crypto, but rest assured I'm doing it. Yeah. Well, Argentina isn't doing as bad as some other places, so hang tough. Murray P, appreciate that. Norway here to Simon. Yeah, I've got lots of people in Scandinavia. Johnny Allen Said, I saw your question come in, but the system shut off. I wasn't able to respond. You had a question yesterday about housing market. Should you buy now, or should you wait or invest? So first of all, the housing market typically in cities or areas that are growing in affluence typically will grow at the rate of inflation. And I reckon that's 7 to 10% in the US. I don't know where you're based, but look at the local real inflation rates and in a good housing market, and they'll tell you the price that it's going to increase. The question though now is, I do recommend buying real estate, even if it's something you can't afford, but borrow as much as you can. Try borrow 80% loan to value. Try get a 10% interest only mortgage at a fixed rate. Very important. Lock in those 2.5% rates now. Because real estate or inflation's at 7 to 10%, so you'll end up after 10 years paying back a lot less. Like I think honestly, if you borrowed $1 million at 2.5% now, you can pay that off with one Bitcoin in 10 years. So just think about, not guaranteed, but at least 800,000 of it will be paid back. So, but we got English people here as well, staying up late. I hope things aren't too bad. Isn't the California housing market dead? No, it's not. Still, I think, offices are opening up again. Offices are requiring employees to go back to the office too. And we'll see. Engine presentation, please. Yes, NFTs are hot. There was a lot of discussion on NFTs at the conference as well in Miami. Engine is my favorite play for that, but everybody's getting in the game. And I don't think people realize the potential of NFTs as well. So, hello from the Bay Area, Elijah. Yes, I'll see you there next week. Cool. That's a wrap. Unless there's any final questions you guys need, or I hope this was very informative. I think there's a lot of key messages there we all need to know. Spread the word. We're still very early, only 2% adoption. The big money is coming. Don't be shaken out. Don't be scared by this volatility now from 64,000 down to 35,000. And there's lots of talk of Bitcoin going to 20,000. I don't kind of see that happen. Did you watch the Lex Friedman Vitalik podcast? I watched parts of it. I didn't have 3 hours to spend, but I wish there was a piece that had all the best parts summarized the way I summarized 12 hours of conference for you guys. And Ben Frost, are you at Epcot? No. Omi is the leader in NFT, not Engine. Okay, I will check out Omi. I've heard a lot of good things about Omi, but we haven't done a deep dive into it yet. So big thank you. Yes, everybody, don't worry about the short-term volatility now with Bitcoin. Think 5 years from now, 10 years from now. This is the hardest money ever on the planet. Again, like that guy Jeff Foss said, he said, even if there was a 95% chance Bitcoin could go to zero and a 5% chance it would go up, he'd still invest. And I always say there's a 1% chance Bitcoin could go to zero. So only invest money that you can afford to lose. But the future's still incredibly bright. And it's not just me saying that. All those brilliant minds today at the conference were saying that too. So big thank you, everybody. I'm going to sign off now and wish you all a good night. And I hope you got your questions, especially Johnny Allen Said. Uptrend, would it be advantageous to wait or enter real estate? Again, if you can borrow 80% of your money from a bank at a fixed rate for 10 years, borrow all you can and own the real estate, because the real estate is also a great hedge against inflation. All right. So big thank you, everybody. Have a good night, and I will see you all on the flip side tomorrow. Tomorrow is IA Q&A with videos from